Whenever I get weary and I've had enough, feel like giving up, you know it's you, babe. Giving me the courage and the strength I need. Please believe that it's true. Babe, I love you. Just thinking about you, listeners. I've had a rough go of it the last several months. The last few days haven't been much better, but I'm here. So alright then, on with it. Welcome to the Sunder the Sky podcast. I am your host, Christopher Sky-Sunderer, coming to you from my fortified bunker deep beneath the streets of Kent, Ohio, as the world above me loses its goddamn mind over what is essentially a half-assed flu outbreak, because the masses are nothing if not completely enthralled to whatever narrative the mainstream news media wants to force-feed them. Yeah, I'm piecemealing this one together, starting today, and hoping to wrap up by the weekend. My voice and energy have been real unreliable the last several days, as I've been, getting over a several months long bout of illness. See some of my previous episodes for details on all of that, if you're a newcomer. So if it seems like things are jumping around a bit in this episode, being a little rough and possibly disjointed, that's why, okay? Today, I'm feeling pretty good, in spite of the fact that I just had a root canal yesterday. And I gotta ask, if somebody knows the answer to this question, please tell me, because I'm very curious. Why are there so many horror stories about root canals? Root canals are the major dreaded dental procedure that everybody seems terrified of, and now, having had one myself, I have no idea why that is. I mean, it was nothing. You know, they numb you out, so you don't feel it happening. I mean, you hear the drill, and that's not a pleasant sound, I guess. And you feel the vibrations of it as it bites into your tooth. Little bits of tooth fly into your mouth and stuff like that. But it didn't hurt or anything. It wasn't like I was squirming in the chair and in pain. This was the first procedure of this type that I've ever had. It's actually the first cavity I've ever had in my life. Knock on wood. And it wasn't due to poor hygiene or anything like that. What happened was I had a wisdom tooth in the very back of the left side of, my jaw. So it's the lower teeth on the left side, way in the back. There's a wisdom tooth that was growing in basically sideways. When they take that x-ray that goes all the way around your head, and then when they lay that x-ray picture out flat, it just looks like two big rows of teeth, your uppers and your lowers, on this mouth that's like 12 inches wide. But all the teeth, as you go across the picture, straight, 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 and then you get to that one way over on the side, and it's like whang, just growing in diagonally. But as that wisdom tooth grew in, it was pushing on the regular tooth next to it, the non-wisdom tooth molar right next to it, and it caused it to crack. So, over time, fluids and whatnot get down into the crack, and the tooth gets infected, and, then you've got a cavity. Now, why did I get a root canal and not a simple filling? Well, the first thing that had to happen was they had to get rid of the wisdom tooth. So I had that done, the wisdom tooth extraction, several months ago. Then they wait for you to heal from that extraction, and then they do the filling, right? Well, the problem was that sometime after the extraction was when all of this illness shit started back in October. I had an infection that my doctor wouldn't test me for. I don't know why. And then the infection got so bad, because it had gone untreated for 2 months, that I ended up with sepsis, and I was in the hospital. And then from being in the hospital on antibiotics for so long, I developed C. diff, and then the C. diff kept coming back, and it's just been a hell of a few months. Because of that, they can't operate on you if you're sick. So the filling has had to wait, and wait, and wait, and wait. And then when I finally went in to get the filling about a month ago, they looked at it and said, no, this has gotten too bad. It's too infected. You're going to need a root canal before we can fill it. So I got scheduled with an endodontic surgeon, and yeah, that all finally happened yesterday. Ugh. Anyway, I'm here. I'm here for you guys that have kept up with me and been following me, sending me your positive vibes, your thoughts as I've been going through all this stuff. You know, it's much appreciated. Thank you for praying, those of you who pray. It is demonstrably, provably, mathematically provably untrue that prayer, as the left so frequently asserts, quote, does nothing. So I really appreciate all that support, and you guys are the reason I'm here. You know, I probably coulda, shoulda, woulda waited another couple of weeks before getting back into it. You know, when I podcasted a few weeks ago thinking, yeah, I was finally getting through this, but I wasn't. I mean, I really wasn't. I was very sick the very next day, so. But, yeah, I'm here, and I'm feeling like I might finally be pulling out of this, so. All right, let's get into this. Hey, guys. I'm just breaking in here for a bit of a message about today's episode. As I've mentioned on the Facebook Sunder the Sky group a few times, this episode has been recorded over several days. Ordinarily, I sit down and I record an episode all in one shot. But because I've been recovering from illness, my voice has been really unreliable. As I sit here recording this now, I can tell already I've only got like a minute left on my voice. What I want to tell you about today's show is, like every episode, it was originally 3 segments. A beginning, a middle, and an end. And the middle or main segment of today's show was about the coronavirus and everything going on in the media and what I think is behind a lot of what's going on. It evolved as I was recording. I went off on some tangents that ended up being pretty important as well. But they were rambling and everything. I didn't script any of it. Okay, so, and I didn't script anything really today. And when I say script, what I do on this show, the way I normally record, is I have a list of bullet points, things that I want to hit, and I put them in the order that I want to hit them. And then if there are specific things that I want to make sure that I mention or make sure that I say, I include those under the bullet points, you know, like an outline, okay? But I don't write a script. But for these tangents that I was going off on in the coronavirus segment, I didn't have anything. I was just kind of shooting from the hip and freewheeling. But as I did that, the topic became bigger and the presentation became bigger, and it's way too long to include in the episode. It's just that segment is over 2 hours long. So there isn't going to be a middle segment today. What I'm going to do is break that off and make it its own episode. And it's all recorded. I don't have to rely on my voice for that, okay? So all I have to do is work on it from an editing standpoint to get it to a level and to a size that I think is more digestible, and then it flows better and makes more sense. It's not so disjointed. Today is just going to be the first segment and then the last segment. Last segment, of course, is listener questions. So that's what today is, and I'll try to have the next episode out by the weekend. So just to let you know why this episode's going to be a little different. All right, and on with the show. Okay, so let's get into this today. This first story is in response to a listener, not really a question, but a listener request from Nicole from Facebook. She wanted me to look into this.
The Trump administration is making some big changes to the food stamp program. Today, the U.S. Department of Agriculture finalized a new rule expected to end food stamps for nearly 700,000 people. Now known as SNAP, the food stamp program helps to feed more than 36 million Americans.
Donald Trump's latest genius idea, cutting out half of the cash benefits that most recipients of SNAP benefits, once commonly known as food stamps, receive, and replacing the funds with a box of canned vegetables, cereal, and other non-perishable foods.
The Trump administration announced today it is going forward with a plan to kick nearly 700,000 people off of food stamps. The administration formalizing a rule that makes it harder for states to waive federal standards around who can qualify for the food stamp program, which is now known as SNAP.
Okay, let's first cut through all of the Trump derangement terror spin and just look at what's actually going on, okay? And here my voice is going out on me again, so let me pop some of these in. So what's actually going on here? Well, the Trump administration is going to be making some changes starting the 1st of next month to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Now, it used to be known as food stamps because once upon a time, you received these benefits in the form of little stamped voucher notes. They were a kind of monopoly money that you could spend on food. Okay, they were spendable only on food. And they called them food stamps. Today, there's a new tool called EBT, which stands for Electronic Benefits Transfer, which comes to the recipient in the form of a little card similar in function to a debit card, complete with a PIN number that fills up with your food benefit dollars electronically every month. It's also used for cash assistance for those who receive that, and I believe a few other things that I'm not too sure about. I really didn't look into that, but the money on the card is only spendable on food. If you tried to buy anything else with it, it just won't go through. Now, the Trump economy is booming, even in spite of the stock market drop that we've experienced since the coronavirus outbreak, and we're going to get into what's behind all of that later on in the main segment, okay? But even in spite of that, the economy is going like gangbusters, and it has been since just after Trump took office and started making decisions. Of particular note is the fact that several million SNAP recipients have already gotten off the program since finding work in the last couple of years. Those news segments that I played mentioned that just over 36 million Americans are currently receiving food stamps. Trump's changes to the program, they say, will kick over 700,000 people off of food stamps and could result in around 3 million others losing their benefits. Yeah, see episode 9, Good Science, Bad Science, Part 1, for everything you need to know about the mainstream media's usage of the word could. But putting aside the fact that their hysterical projection of 3+ million people possibly losing SNAP down the road amounts to about 10% of people on SNAP right now, the 700,000 plus that are expected to lose SNAP benefits at the start of next month are also of a particular, let's just say that there are some details missing from the mainstream media coverage pertaining to why those particular 700,000 people will stop receiving SNAP. And we'll get into that momentarily. Mentioned nowhere in any of the mainstream coverage of these changes is the fact that the number of Americans currently on SNAP, the 36 million, is down by 10 million people since 2017. That's almost the entire amount of SNAP recipients added to the program under the Obama administration. So, almost all of the people who had to get on SNAP during the Obama years have gotten off SNAP since Trump took office. SNAP enrollment spiked to the highest number ever in 2015, tipping the scales at over 45 million people. That's almost a sixth of the country using what was originally intended to be a last-ditch, worst-case scenario stopgap against starvation. SNAP is intended to keep you from starving. It's not intended to become the way you live. All of these pundits, which is all anyone in the mainstream media with a handful of exceptions is anymore, there are no reporters, there are no journalists at CNN or MSNBC or the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Huffington Post or USA Today. In fact, just as an aside here, in the wake of the outbreak, if you're so damn worried about running out of toilet paper, instead of braving the exposure risk involved in running to Costco or Walmart, I recommend you just subscribe to a couple national newspapers, okay? That'll keep you stocked. But anyway, so what is the Trump administration doing specifically to the SNAP program? They are doing three things. One, they are tightening the work requirement and criteria that an individual must meet in order to qualify for benefits. Two, they are taking steps to prevent states from opting out of those requirements. And three, they are going to revise the way food benefits are distributed. Now, what that means, it means that some portion of the money that you get each month for food, if you're a SNAP recipient, will come not in the form of money, but rather in a box of food delivered to your door. Now, they haven't specified how much of the cash benefit will go toward your food box, but they've said that it's only a part of it. Okay, so just for example, let's say it's 30%. If you get $200 a month for food, you will now instead get $140 a month and a box with $60 worth of food. Now, this wouldn't be what $60 would get you from the store, because the government is going to be buying this food at wholesale. So it's closer to what $80 to $100 would get you if you paid retail. And you'll still get most of your food assistance cash. Some things to note about these changes. The first two changes in particular, which pertain to the increased work requirements, that's only going to apply to able-bodied individuals who receive SNAP benefits. So if you're disabled, you've got kids, etc., none of this is going to affect your benefits. The only people affected will be people who can work and aren't. In the past, there's always been this factor that people might be on SNAP because they were unable to find work. That shouldn't still be a problem. This is not Obama's America anymore. This is the working person's America now. We now have a deficit in workers. Do you understand what that means? We now have more jobs than we have people to fill them. So this idea that, well, I would work, but nobody's hiring, is now 100% bullshit. But let's talk about those first two changes. We've explained the food box, okay? So let's look at the other two changes, which are really one and the same, or at the very least related. They're tightening up the work requirements, and they're going to prevent states from opting out of them. The way it's always worked is that in order to receive the federal SNAP money, states would have to certify that their SNAP recipients, their SNAP receiving citizens, were meeting the federal employment guidelines, basically to ensure that unless someone were disabled, they weren't just sitting back and letting the taxpayers feed them for free, and that they were actively trying to get work and working as much as they could, yet still unable to make ends meet in terms of putting food on the table. The current federal legislation on SNAP work requirements is as follows. Current federal law states that adults aged 18 to 59 receiving SNAP benefits are required to work part-time or agree to accept a job if offered one. Stricter rules apply to able-bodied adults without dependents, or ABODs, A-B-A-W-Ds, able-bodied adults without dependents, that are 18 to 49, who are subject to a 3-month limit of benefits in 3 years unless they meet a work requirement of 80 hours per month. The federal regulatory minimum requires that ABODs between the ages of 18 and 49 1. Register for work. 2. Participate in an employment and training, E&T, or workforce program, if assigned. And 3. Refrain from voluntarily quitting a job or reducing hours below 30 hours a week. Failure to meet these requirements results in disqualification from SNAP for 1 month for the first instance, 3 months for the second, and 6 months for the third. States can seek SNAP work requirement waivers from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to temporarily suspend the 3-month limit for individuals in areas with insufficient jobs. At some point since the time limit's enactment in 1996, every state except Delaware has sought a waiver. In addition, states may exempt up to 15% of their SNAP caseload that is ineligible for benefits because of the time limit, extending eligibility to 1 ABOD for 1 month. The 2014 Farm Bill established E&T pilot projects, that's education and training projects, to test new strategies and determine the most effective means of helping SNAP recipients gain and retain employment that leads to self-sufficiency. These pilot projects were implemented in 10 states starting in 2016. Each pilot project must undergo an evaluation process that has yet to be completed. In 2018, state legislative sessions so far, 2 states enacted legislation related to SNAP work requirements, West Virginia and Wisconsin. An additional 6 states, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, introduced legislation that would in some form eliminate SNAP work requirement waivers. States also introduced legislation that would bring stricter governance to the work element of the SNAP program. Now, as I said a moment ago, and that's from the USDA fact sheet on SNAP work requirements at the federal and state level. I'll put a link to that in the description box. But as I said a moment ago, there is something that has gone completely unspoken in all of the mainstream press about the 700,000 plus people who are going to lose their SNAP benefits when this all goes into effect next month. And it is this. Not a single one of those 700,000 plus people needs SNAP anymore. Assuming they ever did. They want SNAP. That's different. In a lot of cases, looking at these 700,000, they're not receiving food assistance because they can't work. They're not disabled, they're not elderly, and it's not that they can't find a job. They're young, able-bodied, and would prefer not to work. Now a little bit of anecdotal talk. My parents dropped out of college when they were very young, and I believe they did it to get married. Okay, I'm not sure about the exact timeline here, I would have to ask my mom. But I remember when I was a little kid, and my brother came along when I was 5, my sister came along when I was 6, and I remember we were very poor. We lived in public housing. We received food benefits. In fact, we received food benefits in the form of a box. Every week we got a box that had bread, peanut butter, milk. I think it had orange juice, breakfast cereals. So I don't know. I mean, the food box thing is not a new idea, right? Anyway, my parents got sick of living that way and put themselves back through college. Now they had to work to do that. So they were taking care of 3 young children while working and going to college. All right, so I know firsthand that if you're an able-bodied adult, this is doable. And the Trump changes aren't even making these changes, as I understand it, to people with, it won't apply to people with kids. Okay, so, and even if it did, so what? Get a job. There are plenty of jobs out there. All right, my parents put themselves back through school. They had to work part-time jobs. Okay, a lot of these people who aren't working, it's like, well, I can't get a job that I would like. Again, so what? I mean, my mom worked as a secretary, a medical secretary at Akron City Hospital that whole time, and she was able to do that and go to school because she put herself on night shift. So she worked the graveyard shift at the hospital, went to school during the day, and then got home in time for us, when the kids got home from school, to take care of the kids, right? When did this woman sleep? Well, she slept very little. My dad worked all kinds of jobs, part-time, full-time. He worked at Wendy's one point, flipping burgers while he was going after his economics degree. And my mom ended up a registered nurse. My dad ended up with his master's in economics and got a job as an executive at Alltel. What if you're disabled? Well, this won't affect you if you're disabled, but even if it did, there are very few people, like I'm disabled and I work, okay? I do all kinds of work, okay? I've got a bunch of things that I do for money, and it's doable. I can't find a job in my field is not the same as I can't find a job, all right? So just because somebody's holding out for an executive position at some publishing giant, and because of that they can't work at Taco Bell, that's meaningless. There are plenty of jobs, and you can, and it's not all like burger flipping Mick jobs, okay? There's lots out there right now. There are more jobs out there right now than there have ever been in this country. And when you do that, when it's just, well, you can't find a job that you would enjoy, so you don't get a job and you take SNAP and you take all these benefits, what you're doing is fraud. Period. Sorry. Good morning. And there is rampant fraud surrounding every public assistance program in this country. All right. And first of all, public assistance programs are fraudulent to begin with. It is not the government's job to take care of poor people. It's not their job to feed them, give them health care, indoctrinate their children, etc. And, okay, and as a voluntarist / ANCAP, I don't want to get into the weeds with all of that right now. It's not what this is about. I'm just looking at the program. Nicole asked me to look into it. So I don't want to get into the weeds of how the program shouldn't exist in the first place. It shouldn't. That is true, okay? Charity should be left to the private sector. Compassion should be left to the people capable of having it, not the cadre of professional psychopaths who profess to rule over everyone and run everything. The state, and this really is why I want to stay on the program itself, the state, once it exists, necessitates itself. You're right. Private charities don't feed, clothe, and shelter as many people as the state. Private charities don't treat as many sick or injured people as the state. They're right about that. Because they can't. Private charities don't help as many people because they can't. And it's not that they can't because they're unable. They can't because the state monopolizes those endeavors. Remember that the authoritarian position, the statist position, is that government is the one thing we all belong to. Belong to. It is the great God above us, the wondrous machinery of civilization. It is the embodiment of, quote, we're all in this thing together. As far as they're concerned, everything, from brain surgery to football tournaments, from automobile manufacturing to scrotum waxing, should be conducted by the state. Everyone should just be assigned jobs based upon their abilities, etc. The communist dream made manifest. That's one of the many, many things I hate about communism is its name. Communism. Community is and should be a good, true, and beautiful thing. It should be a private thing, free of aggressive force. Communism claims the entire society as its community and its charge, and proclaims that anyone who doesn't like something about the way it's run should be, quote, re-educated by force. See Kyle Jurek. According to them, it shouldn't just be the disabled and elderly receiving food from the government. We should all get all of our food from the government. Wouldn't that be grand? Right now, you can walk into the store and choose from among various different options in any and every product you could possibly want. Hell, you don't even have to leave the house anymore. They'll just bring it to you if you order it online. But that should all be run by the same people who do such a great job with public education, the post office, and the BMV. Really? These people can't even count votes. And this is all in the name of compassion, right? There's a great book by Arthur C. Brooks titled, Who Really Cares? Blows the lid off of that narrative completely. Read that. I'll have a link to where you can buy it in the description box. Conservatives, and you know me, I include libertarians, voluntarists, ANCAPs, etc. in that term. Alright, conservative to me means conservative about the application of government. Because it's the only way conservative and liberal as terms really make sense in the context of today. Alright, liberals are not liberal, conservatives are not conservative. Spending doesn't go down under conservative quote-unquote presidents. Alright, and freedom doesn't go up under quote-unquote liberal presidents. So, but the terms are still usable and still make sense if what someone is liberal about is the application of government force to the address of issues, and what someone is conservative about is the application of government force to the address of issues. So conservative about the application of government is how I mean that. Overwhelmingly, we, the conservative, give more to private charity. We do more in terms of our time and energy to help the less fortunate, the down on their luck, the sick, the disabled, the elderly. We do and give more than anyone on the ideological left, on a voluntary basis. And I'll remind everybody, there's nothing stopping you if you're a Democrat, if you're a leftist. There's nothing at all stopping you from sending extra money to the government every year. So you say, well, we need to be spending more, we need to be paying more for this and this and this. Well, why don't you then? Do it! Because you always have to use that term we, because what you're really saying is, yeah, I'll do it if you put a gun to everybody's heads and force everybody else to do it with me. Go fuck yourself. You're not compassionate. You're not charitable. What you are is intellectually lazy and morally a tyrant. So anyway, we do more and we give more than anyone who counts themselves as a proud member of the vanguard of aggression-derived authority on Earth. Remember two things. One, SNAP is a last-ditch, worst-case scenario stopgap against starvation, not a way of life. Two, it is paid for by people who work. It is paid for by taxpayers. 3, that money is taken from taxpayers by force. They aren't given a choice as to whether or not they pay. Taxpayer is one of the most propaganda misnomers in the world. You don't pay taxes. They take taxes from you. And all of these programs are overrun by fraud at every level. You've got fraud and corruption in the legislation of these programs. You've got fraud and corruption in the administration of these programs at the federal level, the state level, and the municipal or local level. You've got fraud on the part of a lot of the recipients. Now, my problem, whenever I talk about government assistance programs like this, I'm not criticizing the people who honestly need help. All right, if you really need welfare and you choose not to take it on principle, hey, great for you. That is awesome, and you should be celebrated for that. But if you've just got no other way to make ends meet and you've got to take the money, I have no problem with you doing that. Because, much like the people who are forced to pay for these programs, you don't have a choice either. If your choice is take this money or starve, I'm not going to sit there and tell you, well, you should have starved. Okay? Like I said, the government creates something and then it exists whether you want it to or not, and it prevents other better solutions from happening. So a big part of the reason that you have to take that assistance is because the government is preventing other options from coming into being. You're trapped as much as the taxpayer. I get it. Ayn Rand took Social Security when she was elderly. You know, everybody says that, well, that makes her a hypocrite. No, it makes you someone who doesn't like to think. She paid into that system her whole life involuntarily. She was forced. And then she was able to get some of that money back. And you're going to call her a hypocrite for taking it? Go fuck yourself. Okay? But the most obvious fraud committed by recipients of SNAP is in the form of able-bodied individuals who can work and don't, and take the money instead. There's a guy up in Cleveland. Actually, there are a few of these people. Cleveland is anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour from here, depending on traffic. There's a guy I know of, I've seen him, who pulls up to one of the public parking decks in a brand new, late model BMW. Really, really nice car, decked, and it's not a little one. It's not like a BMW 3 Series or something like that. I believe it's a 7. He gets out of the car, all right, shuts the door, locks it, and then walks down the street 2 blocks and starts panhandling. And somebody in Cleveland, one of the news stations up there, it was an AM station, 1100 WTAM. They interviewed the guy and found out that's all he does is panhandle. It's part-time. He's not there all the time. He says he's there 6 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and he makes over $80,000 a year. And he revealed that he's not alone. Okay, there are a few people up there that he knows of that are in the same situation. He said he wasn't even... There were people that made more than him doing that. Now, if you're walking by on the street, all you see is he's got this cheaply made Sharpie on a piece of cardboard sign about being disabled and I need help and all this, and they give him a few bucks. They don't know. Now, there are a lot of people up there that beg that are legitimately, they're homeless, but there's just a lot of fraud. Okay, and I don't remember if they asked him this, but I promise you the guy's getting benefits too. A big part of the fraud in SNAP comes from renting your card out. Yeah, let's say, some of these people, they have, somebody else in their apartment building or something that they'll say, hey, do you want to save money on groceries? I've got $200 on my food card. I'll give you the PIN number and let you take it to the store. You can spend those $200 if you give me $100. So you just got $100 of free groceries. Now, why would somebody do that? Because they don't need the money for food. They're using that money for whatever else. And a lot of times it's drug money or alcohol money, you name it. Okay, so for them, SNAP is just a way for them to get their booze for free or their meth for free. And let me give you another example outside of SNAP. Take the absolute fiasco we're dealing with in terms of health coverage, Medicaid, etc. I used to work, before I became disabled, I used to work as an independent insurance agent. I wrote, sold, and serviced policies for life, health, property, and casualty insurance. And it's not just selling. You're also, once you write somebody a policy, you become their representative to the company, and you become the point of service on that policy for both the company and the client. So if the company ever needs information or something like that, it goes through you. And if the policyholder ever needs any changes made to their policy, you're the one they call to get that done. If they're having trouble getting a claim paid, you're the one they call. But a big part of the job is writing policies, and in insurance sales that are legitimate, the job is not just trying to sell policies. I mean, yeah, that's at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. But the first part of that is to assess a given person or family's needs, assess their risk factors, and then try to put together a plan that will cover them at the level they need for a premium they can afford, right? And there's a lot of work involved in this. You're better off as an agent if you work independently, in my opinion, because it allows you to become appointed with lots of different insurance companies. Or appointed meaning able to sell their policies, right? Very often, if you can't find a good policy fit for somebody at one company, you can find something that's a better fit for them elsewhere, okay? And if you're working as a captive agent, only representing one company, you don't have that flexibility. I mention that because it gives you more flexibility, but also means you can go more in depth, and you need to go more in depth when you're assessing somebody. So part of assessing a potential client is figuring out what they can afford. And from the health policy writing that I did, I can assure you that at least before Barry Soetoro decided to step in and quote-unquote help with Obamacare, thus doubling and tripling health insurance premiums while simultaneously fining you at almost the same rate if you can't afford insurance. Okay, so not talking about those times. I'm talking about back before Frank Marshall Davis Jr. became president. There were plenty of people who absolutely could afford health insurance and chose not to. And a big part of the reason they're able to make that choice is that they are rightly predicting that the government will come in and just take care of them if they're not covered. And it happens. This thing where people without health insurance are kicked out of the emergency room with gaping wounds and terrible illnesses does not happen in this country. That is entirely a creation of fiction. That's something that happens in TV shows. It's something that happens in movies. That is not representative of the real world in the United States of America. Now, for someone aged 20 to 40 in good health who doesn't smoke, decent, fairly comprehensive major medical health coverage at that time would have cost between $100 and $150 a month. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. All right, I'd seen it as low as $80 and as high as $180. And people would say, whoa, that's way more than I can afford. But then you start doing your due diligence and asking questions, and you find out, this guy's spending $400 to $500 a month drinking on the weekends. This lady over here is dropping over $200 a month on eating at restaurants. I had one kid, 26, 27 years old, spent in excess of $300 a month on video gaming. It's like, folks, it's not that you can't afford health insurance. You're sacrificing health insurance to indulge in the things you actually can't afford. It's your indulgences that you can't afford, not health insurance. You're making a choice. And then you're turning around and pleading poverty in order to justify money being taken from your neighbors at gunpoint to cover your losses. Your expenses, really. That same exact thing takes place with SNAP. Renting out your card benefits to pay for liquor or weed or whatever else. Now, sure, of course, there are people who really are too sick and or disabled to be able to work. And nothing of what the Trump administration is doing is going to affect those people. The mainstream press, they're not reporting this situation accurately or fairly. It's something Trump is doing, and that makes it bad. If Obama were doing this same exact thing, they'd call it wonderful, good, and progressive. And you know it. I mean, Obama did do stuff like this, particularly concerning immigration, when, I think it was in 2014, he required immigrants to immediately find work, for example, and prevented them from receiving benefits. I mean, it was, in brass tacks, it ended up being a pretty half-assed measure, but it was something. And what he said when he was asked about it in the press conference or whatever, he said, look, you're ostensibly coming here to work, not just to get on the public dole, right? Yeah, he said that. And these same sycophantic pundits, Joyless Reed, Little Jimmy Acosta, he looked up from his diary long enough to love on Obama's manly decisiveness. Everybody in the press celebrated him for his bold leadership. But, this time it's Trump. Trump became president even though the press said he wasn't allowed to. So, fuck him, Orange Man bad. Okay, so this first question comes from Mike. It's very simple. How can they honestly back Biden? I get it. Even people who are against him, even people who backed Harris or Yang or whoever, right? My answer is collectivists. It's what they do. Okay, this is the, as Razorfist has said, the folly of pushing a collectivist message and ideology. And as I've said before and shown numerous examples of on this show, everything and anything they say before a frontrunner emerges goes right out the window the moment a frontrunner emerges. Everyone on the left who was opposed to a candidate, and not just candidates, but policy proposals, media stories, anything. Once the candidate, idea, narrative, whatever, once it becomes the party thing, the entirety of the party jumps in line behind, he, she, or it. Once again, Chris Matthews, when he was backing Clinton in the primary race against then-candidate Obama, and Matthews is my go-to example of this because he's such a loudmouth, bloviating bullshit artist. He's a great example of this. When he was backing Clinton, who was running for the Democratic nomination against Obama, Matthews would bring Obama people on his show and set them up. He'd trap them into questions he knew they couldn't answer, and he'd rake them over the coals. I mean, he did everything short of literally strapping Obama's people down and breaking them on a rack until they renounced their messiah and swore fealty to the Clinton Foundation live on air. Okay? Then, the exact night that Obama was announced as the Democratic candidate for president, Matthews became that same messiah's Saul of Tarsus. He spun 180 degrees on a dime. He goes on from there to talk about how just listening to Obama read a teleprompter gives him a thrill up his leg, etc. Proclaiming during a live segment that he saw it as his job, as, quote, a journalist, to make sure the Obama administration succeeded.
You're a big Barack supporter, right, Senator?
I am. Yes, I am.
Well, name some of his legislative accomplishments. No, Senator, I want you to name some of Barack Obama's legislative accomplishments tonight, if you can.
Well, what I will talk about is more about what he's offering to the American people.
No, what has he
right
accomplished,
now.
sir? You say you support him.
Tonight.
Sir, you have to give me his accomplishments. You've supported him for president. You're on national television.
Well,
name his legislative accomplishments, Barack Obama, sir.
Well, I'm not going to be able to name you specific
Can you name any
items of legislative accomplishment.
Can you name anything he's accomplished as a congressman?
No, I'm not going to be able to do that tonight.
Well, that's a problem, isn't it?
Well, Well, no, I don't think it is, because I think one of the things that Senator Obama does is he inspires.
Not even the person that's here to speak on behalf of Barack Obama can list his legislative accomplishments. I've worked with Senator Clinton in and around the issue.
But let's talk about.
I want to stop and allow you to have the opportunity to list the accomplishments, sir.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. One of the things that she does, for example, on health care, she offers that and indicates that she's offering a solution.
No, we're not talking about her accomplishments. You're supposed to be talking about it.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut this off because I've been told to, but Senator, I'm going to give you one more shot. List Barack Obama's accomplishments as a U.S. Senator now.
Well, what I'll do is
Now,
I will say this to you. He will offer the ability for the United States to be a leader in the world again. He will put health care back on the front burner.
thank you very much, U.S. Congresswoman Stephanie Tubbs Jones and State Senator from Texas, Kirk Watson. He's here to defend Barack Obama, and he had nothing in his, well, he had nothing to say.
Always speak before Barack Obama, not after Barack Obama.
I have to tell you, you know, it's part of reporting this case, this election. The feeling most people get when they hear a Barack Obama speech, I felt this thrill going up my leg. I mean, I don't have that too often.
Steady.
No, seriously, it's a dramatic event. He speaks about America in a way that has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with the feeling we have about our country, and that is an objective assessment.
This is what collectivism gives you. It's all lockstep and conformity. The party that believes in, diversity, 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 they believe in diversity of what color people are or what genitals they have in their pants, but when it comes to diversity of ideas, whoa, you know, you're committing a cardinal sin, an unforgivable cardinal sin if you step outside the party line. Look what they're doing to Tulsi Gabbard. This next one is not really a question so much as an observation and a question. A friend of mine online and a listener to the show sent me a meme that I'd made just about a year ago depicting a little rowboat that I labeled Democratic Party, and there's a humpback whale with a big red MAGA emblazoned on its underside breaching high out of the water and about to crash down on that tiny little boat, right? It's just going to obliterate it. Now, in the little boat, there are only two people. I only put two people in there. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Okay, and again, I made this meme, I don't know exactly how long. It was last summer at some point. So it's been nearly a year. Okay? And in the caption that I'd originally posted to accompany that meme, I'd said simply 2020 prediction. Now, I'm not going to name this listener because she didn't send this to me as a listener question. I don't think, anyway. It was just a message in an ongoing conversational thread that she and I have had going for a long time. So I'm not going to name her, but I will say that when she sent me the meme, she said, "Looks like you called it," and then she went on to ask, "How did you know?" So she's like, "Looks like you called it. How did you know?" Okay. First off, it is true that on the one hand, the Democratic Party and the mainstream media, but I repeat myself, absolutely are screwing Bernie Sanders over. That is happening. You know, again. You can see this from any one of 100 pieces of evidence, not least of which is in simple draw. Your typical Biden rally pulls in attendance somewhere between, you know, an intimate dinner party with close friends and a small-town high school play. Whereas Sanders rallies frequently rack up attendance numbers in the thousands. I made the same observation shortly before election night in 2016. I said, look, and this was on the blog, sunderthesky.com, one of the reasons I really am confident about Trump's chances in the election in spite of all the polls they're giving us, because remember at the time, they were giving us poll numbers that had Clinton 98+% likely to win. Okay, just every single poll had her way up there. I think the lowest chances anyone gave her were over 80%. But I posted on the blog that I was confident, and even if Trump didn't win, there was still a lot to take from the election because, you know, it was a silver lining that people may have missed, that the guy wasn't a politician. It's the first time just some businessman, somebody from the populace who wasn't a career politician first, actually got that close to the White House, right? But I was still pretty confident about his chances because I have functioning eyes. And I showed two pictures side by side. It was Hillary at one of her rallies, talking to a room with about 20 people in it, okay? And then there was a Trump rally that looked like one of the biggest nights at a WWE pay-per-view event. Just a huge stadium packed with people, right? And we know, I mean, you can find these stories on YouTube. they were framing shots to make her rallies look more crowded than they were. In the run-up to the 2016 election, with a lot of different Democrats, whenever they would speak, you would get these leaked photos of what they were showing you. Like, what you saw on CNN was the person speaking to this densely packed crowd. So you'd have the person on stage, behind the podium, and in the foreground, you would see a dense crowd of people, right? But then someone would inevitably leak some cell phone picture they took where it was like 30 people packed together really tight right in front of the stage in a giant empty gymnasium or something, just to make it look like she was talking to lots of people. And you know they were editing in crowd sounds. Anyway, a lot of that was going on. So you would see like Hillary rallies where there was, you know, maybe a couple thousand people in attendance. At a Trump rally, there was a bigger head count in line to use the bathroom. You know, and they're doing the same thing you see the same thing with Biden and Bernie. You know, a Sanders rally has thousands of people there. A Biden rally is like nothing. And really, from the perspective of a thoroughly corrupt party, as I've said 100 times before, they're not the party of democracy. They're the party of voter fraud. And from that perspective, why not throw Bernie's campaign under the bus? He rolled over and took it last time, for starters. He immediately fell back in line and buried his face up Hillary's ass. Whoa. How's that for an image? Sorry about that. Anyway, he rolled over and took it last time, right? But there's also this. Let's just take a minute to remind ourselves. He is not now, nor has he ever been, a Democrat. Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat. He's an independent. So really, why should they give him their party's nomination? Like, okay, you know, they're not being honest by giving it to the candidate who has the most votes from their party, but so what? Bernie's not being honest by seeking the Democratic nomination in the first place. If Bernie were being honest, he'd run as an independent. Actually, no. If Bernie were being honest, he'd run for the American Socialist Party's nomination. I know, I can hear you. The Democrats are the American Socialist Party, but, you know, we also have an official American Socialist Party. Why isn't Bernie registered as a member of them? Anyway, in this race for the Democratic nomination, there was an extremely crowded field of candidates. What was it, like 200 people? So first off, there's that. It was a huge crowd of candidates. And it finally narrowed itself down, you know, in the last several months to roughly a dozen. But even then, it was still a very diverse field, right? Klobuchar, a woman whose name and face seem like Brian Froud creations. Then you got Hiawatha, you know, Booker. So you had blacks, you had women, you had Latinos, even an Asian candidate. But it finally comes down to two older-than-dirt rich white men, of whom the more establishment candidate is probably going to take it. How did I call it? Folks, how could anyone not? It's because Biden and Sanders are the two older-than-dirt rich white men. Listen, everybody needs to get their head around this concept. If you haven't, you need to. It is not hyperbole. It is not just something people say. It's true that the Democrats are their own best example of everything they accuse others of being. So what is that? What are their go-to ad hominem attacks about their political opposition? You know, they're only capable of ad hominems and straw men in quote-unquote debate, but of the ad hom side of that 1-2 punch combo that is the only thing in their arsenal, what are their go-to ad homs about political opponents? Well, dyspeptic, rich elites who don't care about the poor or middle class. If you're rich, you're evil. Okay, they're all rich. They say people are sexists. They say people are racists. Racist is probably their biggest, but their two biggest are racist and sexist. So you could narrow that down to just say bigot, right? Well, yeah, the Democratic Party is the native environment of all of those things in this country. They're the racists. They're the sexists. This didn't start with Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. It's in Rules for Radicals because this is how dishonest people operate. He just codified it into their official playbook. That you accuse your opponent of what you're doing. You accuse your opponent of being what you really are. Okay? In that way, you get ahead of it. Okay, Kevin Smith, whenever he gets on stage, he makes fun of his weight more than anybody else ever does in the media. Right? When he was still fat. He's not anymore. He's lost a ton of weight. But it's kind of that same thing. But in that case, it's a more honest approach because it's like, yeah, I see it. And that takes away the power of people making fun of you for it. You know, well, in the political arena, if you're constantly accusing your opponent of being a racist, then if they turn around and try to accuse you of racism, they're going to look ridiculous, especially when you've got, and perhaps only because you've got the media on your side. Okay? I mean, that's how I called it. That's it. This is not any kind of particular acumen on my part. So, ooh, how did I call that? Well, how did you not? I'm not saying that I never had any doubt, or that it was a mathematical certainty. Bloomberg entering the race kind of threw me, especially with how the rich people are evil narrative suddenly turned into our billionaire has more billions than your billionaire the moment he stood up. Was he standing? It's hard to tell without binoculars. But it was like, we have a bigger billionaire than you do. Well, you know, not bigger, but more billionaire-y. Anyway, I also thought Hillary was going to throw her hat in. And she still might. In fact, I think whomever the candidate ends up being might well pick Hillary as their running mate. That could very well be the deep state's play here. This is not an observation to make lightly. Okay, follow this. Biden gets in. You know, let's say he's elected president, which I really don't think will happen, but this could be their play. So Biden gets elected, and then very shortly thereafter is forced to step down due to a declining mental state. The man is obviously in the first stages of dementia. He's got all of the signs. I looked these up. Let's go through them real quick. This is the American Alzheimer's Association's official early warning signs of dementia list. You tell me if this doesn't read like a straight-up description of Joe Biden. Difficulty remembering details or events. You know, like how he was arrested with Nelson Mandela, right? Confusion about time and or place. Various problems with written and or verbal communication, such as stammering, trailing off, mumbling, blending sentences together in ways that don't make sense. Frequently repeating themselves. Why isn't that one of the listed examples of the previous entry? Whatever. Sudden outbursts of anger and or belligerence. Mr. Biden, why are you trying to take away our Second Amendment rights? Oh, you're full of shit. Okay, let's, hey, hush! Hush, little lady! Or that other guy calling him out, and he's like, hey, listen here, fat. Oh no, I think I said Jack or something. Whatever. Okay, let's go on. Poor judgment. Trouble with spatial relationships or, quote, personal space. Okay, according to these last couple, poor judgment and personal space, Biden, according to that, he's had dementia since the 70s. But, I mean, as someone who's followed Biden since before most people even knew who he was, let me just say I'm not entirely willing to rule that out. My first memory of Joe Biden, just as an aside here, it was on some news network. They were broadcasting a vote in committee, which when this happened, that could only have been CNN. I don't think there was anybody else. They were broadcasting some kind of a vote being taken in committee, and Biden was taking the tally. You know, he had a legal pad out in front of him and was taking down a tally with a pen, right? And there was somebody else off to the side who was calling, going around the room calling the names of the representatives. All right, so they call your name, and then you call out your vote, yes or no, right? Now, I don't even remember what the vote was for. This was so long ago. But I remember this moment because it was the first time I ever even heard of Joe Biden. And there's a way you can vote when you're not actually there. You send a proxy. Okay, you send somebody in to sit in your seat, and then when they call your name, you know, the proxy has a list of all the votes they're taking that day. It's like, okay, for this vote, I'm voting yes. For this vote, I'm voting no, whatever. And the proxy will say yes or no, however you voted, and then add by proxy. So they call your name and be like, no by proxy, or yes by proxy, right? So they know that they sent a proxy for that. They need it for their records, I guess. Anyway, they go around the room, they're calling out names. Now, whatever this thing was that they were voting on, all of the Democrats were voting no in lockstep. And most of them weren't there. So most of them were saying no by proxy. You were hearing no by proxy a lot, over and over and over, right? Because God knows the Democrats can't be bothered to show up for work. So a lot of them aren't actually there. They're off at their house in the Hamptons or skiing in Aspen or something, you know, on some junket with lobbyists. But they go around the room, and Biden is taking down the tally, right? And whoever's taking down the tally, when they get to the end, will announce, okay, resolution passes or resolution fails, and then list the numbers, right? So they're going around the room, and Biden is the last one they call because he's the one taking the count. So the person calling out the names finally gets to him and is like, Biden. And Biden's just like, no by proxy. Okay, this resolution fails, blah, blah, blah. Just like any Democrat, just spouting the whatever today's slogan is without even thinking about it. No by proxy. He was there. And that's when I was like, I laughed at that, right? And that was kind of the first time I ever noticed Joe Biden. This was in like 94. And as I was paying more and more attention to Biden, because I had noticed him that time, that whenever he came up, whenever he was talking or whatever, I can't remember, was he the whip at that time? I don't remember. But I remember the guy was a constant gaffe machine. Okay, so yeah, when it comes to poor judgment and difficulty with details, he's had dementia since at least 94, if we're going by that. But anyway, if this happens, you know, if let's say Biden gets the nomination, he picks Hillary as his running mate, and that's the play. Which again, this is not an observation that I make lightly. This really could be what's going on. You know, he picks Hillary and then has to step down due to his declining mental whatever. This would also be just another moment of what I was talking about before in my answer to the last question. They're all about Biden now. They'll shout you down if you bring up his glaringly obvious diminishing mental faculties. But if it were Hillary, for example, waiting in the wings to move into the presidency when he steps down, then boom, they all will 180 heel turn on a dime and fully acknowledge the guy's about 7 cans short of a 6-pack. And they'll be all about pushing him out to swear the Wicked Witch of the left into the Oval Office with all speed, right? But yeah, again, that could very well be the move. Biden essentially being a demented shoehorn to get whatever candidate the deep state really wants into office. If Biden were to be elected later this year, there's no way that guy finishes his term. I mean, he might. I mean, the guy can barely find a coherent sentence. But wouldn't it be funny if, let's assume that's going on, and Biden gets up on stage to announce his pick for his running mate, for his VP, and forgets which name they told him to say, and he says something like Donald Trump or something. Oh, that'd be great. And, you know, yeah, it might not be Clinton either. Maybe it'll be Bernie. Hell, maybe it'll be Michael Obama. Who knows? But one thing I will say, if Biden gets the nomination, and he probably will, pay attention to whomever he, quote unquote, to whomever he, you know, picks. It's not really him picking, but whoever he picks, in quotes, for his running mate. Pay attention to who that is, because whomever that is who I think the deep state actually wants to be president. Okay, and it'll be so obvious that even most Democrat voters will likely focus on that VP pick in conversation, debate, etc. They won't be able to help themselves. Every conversation, every debate, if we're talking about Biden, they'll turn the conversation toward his running mate. You watch. But anyway, yeah, that's how I called it. Who are the two old rich white guys? Okay, that's who it's going to come down to, and that's how I picked. Because that boat in the meme only had 2 people sitting in it, right? So I knew I was just going to copy-paste 2 heads. So which 2 heads should I pick? Well, Biden and Bernie, because that's who it's going to be. And as Biden would say, well, son of a bitch. That's who it was. Okay, so that's all I've got for today. Yeah, tune in soon and we'll get to what the middle part of today was going to be, which was the coronavirus and media hysteria and all of this. Okay, yeah, but thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll talk real soon.
Guess what, bitch? Coronavirus! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real!
Hold up.